Hello readers and viewers of PanOrient News in Tokyo. Our guest today is one of the greatest leaders who have their name being associated with the concept of nation building. He has not only transformed his country from an agricultural backwater into an industrial powerhouse, but he also saved his country from the massive repercussions of the Asian financial crisis back in 1998. Tun Dr. Mahathir, former Prime Minister of Malaysia. Tun Dr. Mahathir, you have been a frequent visitor to Japan, and the Japanese people seem to be very much in love with you, and they think highly of your achievement as a former Prime Minister. Perhaps you could tell us a little about this mutual state of love and admiration.
Yeah. Well, as you know, during the last war, Japan invaded Malaysia. And of course, there is some animosity between the Malaysians and Japan. But we felt that there is a lot to be learned from Japan. I came here in 1961 for the first time. I noticed that the Japanese were working very hard rebuilding their country, and they were so successful that eventually Japan became the second biggest economy in the world. So because of that, we decided that we should copy the Japanese way of developing their country. We introduced what is known as the Look East policy, looking at Japan. And of course, we established good relations with the government of Japan and with the business people. We invited them to come to Malaysia. And this has been happening over a period since 1960s. Naturally, we get to know each other very well. And the Japanese people know about Malaysia, about its progress, and about its attempt to emulate what is happening in Japan. So we became very friendly because of that.
Also, I understand that you have transformed your country from an agricultural backwater into an industrial powerhouse. And also you saved it from the massive repercussions of the Asian financial crisis back in 1998. How did you do that? Because I understand that very few leaders in the world have achieved such a gargantuan task. In my mind is late South African President Nelson Mandela, and also the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan of the United Arab Emirates, and Tun Dr. Mahathir.
Well, we adopted the democratic system in a country that has three different people, three different races: the Malays, indigenous people, the Chinese, and the Indians. So this normally leads to confrontation and conflicts and violence. But we resolved that by deciding that we should share the country, the wealth of the country, the power in the country between these three races. So all three would govern the country. This enabled the country to become very stable and peaceful, and it is only during periods of stability and peace that you can develop and make progress in a country. This is what we achieve. First thing, stability. Having done that, we then look for models of development, and we look at Japan and other countries, and we adopted some of their strategies, their even their work ethics we try to adopt, because we think that work ethics has a strong link with the success or failure of an individual, a community, or a country. So we had problem, of course, with unemployment, and in order to create jobs for our people, agriculture would not help, because agriculture doesn't need many people. So we decided we should industrialize. But we had no knowledge about industry, no technology. So we invited foreign investors to come to Malaysia and to invest in Malaysia with only one condition. They are given tax holidays, But at the same time, the condition is that they create jobs for our people. And indeed, they create so many jobs that eventually we had to depend upon foreign workers in order to take up the jobs that were created.
Okay, this is really very interesting. Also, you have been invited to many international fora, and you have been asked to share the successful story of Malaysia. Do you think that the Malaysian model is exportable? I mean, other countries can import the Malaysian model, or do you think it is kind of a unique experience that should be strictly confined to the Malaysian?
Well, we imported foreign system, foreign technology, and I suppose what we do can be adopted by other countries, but it requires certain basic needs. As I said just now, politically it must be stable. If the country is politically stable, then it can copy some of the things that we did. But if you have conflicts and fighting and civil wars and all that, obviously you cannot adopt Malaysia's strategy.
Okay, this is very interesting. Also, in your interview with the BBC Hard Talk, you said, and I quote, "I told the people I'm a doctor. If I find one leg becoming gangrenous, I remove it." Do you approach politics from medical perspective? I mean, do you analyze political problems the same way you analyze, for example, hepatitis C?
Very much so. I was trained as a doctor, and the doctor faces problems in trying to cure his patients, and there is a process that we go through, like taking the history, doing the physical checks, doing extra checks, using instruments and all that, until we reach a diagnosis. We recognize what kind of disease it is. Once you know the disease, it is not too difficult to find a solution or medicine for the disease. It's the same with administration. All the time you have to face problems, and it may be domestic, it may be foreign. Once you face a problem, you have to study it, understand it, find out what are the causes of the problem, and once you find out the causes, I think you can devise a way of overcoming the problem.
You have been credited with inventing the term Asian values vis-a-vis Western values. In what sense do you think Asian values differ from the Western values?
We are still very orthodox. We still retain our cultural values, our moral values, and we think that they are good for us. We have no need to adopt Western values all the time. There are certain things that Western people do which are good. For example, they talk about equality, about human rights, which are good. But when you go to extremes, then they become bad. You want to say equality between men and women, but you go to the extreme where the bad things done by men should also be available to women. That kind of thinking is not acceptable. It's not Asian. We retain our very orthodox values, and we believe in hard work and less stress on individual rights against community rights.
Have you ever taken a decision when you were a prime minister and you came to regret it later? I mean, when you were a prime minister, have you ever taken a decision that you come to regret later? Because I understand that you are very prudent in the decision making.
I am not very good at choosing people, so I have problems choosing people who were supposed to help me or to succeed me. So that is something that I have done which I regret, but I think it is normal to make such mistakes.
I understand this is really very very difficult to interview Dr. Mahathir without kind of touching with him upon the geopolitics. How do you see the current world order?
World order?
Yep.
Well, the stress now is on a connected world, a globalized world, a world without borders. Now, these are very good in some instances, but there are also negative effects from this. And they vary as between rich countries and poor countries. So when we talk about globalization, we have to understand that some countries cannot be as open as some other countries, which are much more capable of competing. So in order to have a globalized world, we need to give some leeway, some privileges to the weaker countries against the poor countries, so that they will have the ability to progress without too much restriction placed on them.
How do you see the legacy of President Obama? Now he's almost becoming a lame duck.
He has made many changes which are, I think, very good, among which, of course, is the re-establishment of relations with Cuba. And, but as with other presidents, he made promises which he couldn't keep. He couldn't close down Guantanamo Bay 2 days after he became president, for example. He's still around. And there are many practices which he thought he could do away with, but he cannot do away. But things like establishing relations with Cuba, solving the problem between Iran and US, and a few other things, he was quite successful. But one has to remember that many of his policies are enunciated at the end of his term, and it does not mean that his successor will stick to the decisions or the policies that he made. So it may be like all lame duck president. It's good to hear, but it will not be implemented.
He participated recently in the G Summit here in Japan, and also he visited Hiroshima, being the first American president ever to do something like that. Do you see any significance in such visit?
Yeah, I suppose the visit to Hiroshima in itself is a kind of admission that the whole thing was wrong. He did not apologize, but the fact that he visited Hiroshima is an admission in itself that this kind of thing should not happen, that nuclear weapons should not be used. So to that extent, I think the visit was good. But of course, as I said, one of the demands made, which he accepted, was that nuclear weapons should be abolished. He said yes, but it will take a long time. How long, we don't know, but he's not going to be in power anymore, so other people may have other decisions.
Just before we conclude this very interesting question, I just want to ask you one last question. The Republican presidential contender, Donald Trump, was quoted as saying that if he were to become president, he would ban Muslims from entering the United States. What's your comment on that?
Well, I think Donald Trump is an example of the average American. He does not know much about what is happening outside of America. You know, the Americans consider America as the world. That is why when they play American football, and it's all between them, and they call it the World Series. Of course, for them, America is the world. But once he becomes president, he will realize that the world is much bigger, much more complex than America. He's not going to deal with domestic politics. He's going to deal with international politics. At that stage, he may have to revise many of his ideas, especially as his staff, his permanent staff, will point out to him that certain things cannot be done. This happened to Obama. It's happened to every president elected. After they become elected, they cannot implement their promises simply because around them would be advisors, and these advisors know the problems faced by America much more than the new president. So they will have an influence, a big influence over the new president, whether it be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. The same thing will happen.
Dr. Mahathir, it's a great honor to have you, and thank you very much for giving us this interview.